Hi everyone, and welcome back to Waterhouse Forde. Well, the cold has continued. It's been another cold, but also very wet and miserable grey week this week. I've just managed to warm up the workshop a little bit. I don't know how long it's going to stay warm, but we'll see how we get on. So, in our last video, you saw us putting together the steering box and the steering shaft that sits on top. And so in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to mount the steering box onto the tractor and get that all set up, and then we're going to put the shaft on top, and we may well get to getting as far as connecting the drop arms to the steering rods, but we'll see. And of course getting the steering wheel on and all of that. And then there is just one little job that we still need to do, which is essentially to reassemble the gear lever. You may recall in an earlier video we dismantled that. That's all now been cleaned up nicely, got that all ready essentially to reassemble. So we may get to that today as well. We'll just see how we get on. Yeah, also depends how cold it gets and whether I can keep the workshop warm enough to stay down here in between filming. But yeah. Okay, let's see how we get on. Hope that you enjoy it, and yeah, let's see where we go to. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is get this gasket on. We'll get it out of this packaging and get it on. Just as a reminder, that's part number Anglo part number A90271. I guess the one, yeah. And as yeah, obviously again, if you watched the previous video, you know that you basically need two of these. One that goes onto the steering box underneath the tin plate that sits underneath, and then obviously one on top of the gearbox here that seals the gearbox off. So we'll get that out of its wrapping and get some grease on it and get it installed, and then we'll bring the steering box in. Okay, now the gasket, again, it doesn't really matter how it goes. No, sorry. Yeah, it doesn't really matter how it goes on this one, because these little holes are for where it fits onto underneath the tin shield. However, what we must not forget to do is to put our springs back that hold the indents for the gear levers or the gear shafts. So we'll get those out quickly. Just out of the way. And we'll get those back into these three holes here. Now, obviously what's going to happen is the gasket is going to sit on top of those. But when we bring the steering box down, it should push those down fine. And we're just making sure that all the holes line up for the bolt holes, which they seem to be. Lovely. Right. Now, when we put the bolts back, again, this housing is a magnesium alloy housing, and the bolts, of course, are steel. So yet again, we need to think about galvanic corrosion. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just quickly put some grease on the top of this gasket, and then we're going to put some, I'm actually just going to use Loctite for these bolts. I do believe that will provide a good enough barrier between the bolt and the housing. There are other products that you can use, but that's what I have, and so that's what I'm going to use. Okay, so we got that all properly settled. Got the grease all over the gasket. So we can now bring our steering box back in and try to bring that down straight and hopefully as lined up as possible. Now you'll remember when we took it apart, there were two bolts that were slightly longer. They go here on either side of this housing, this casing. And there are flat washers for all of these bolts, so don't forget to put a flat washer on each one. Right, so we got our Loctite, and as I said, we're going to put that on these bolts to primarily as a barrier between the steel bolt and the magnesium alloy housing. Now I want to get these long ones hopefully lined up first, because this is where our three springs are. So we want to try and get those lined up if we can, as early as possible. Right, now we'll get a couple more in just to make sure that we're lined up. I did run a tap down all of these holes just to make sure that the threads were clean, because obviously there was another barrier substance, like a Loctite type material on all of these bolts before. And obviously that does get into the threads and can make it difficult when you're trying to put this thing back together. So I wanted to make sure that those were all nicely cleaned up, so we didn't have problems when we're putting it back. Right, so I'm just spreading the bolts around so that we've got hopefully a reasonably even spread from them as we start to tighten them up and essentially bring the whole assembly down, compressing those three springs. And there you can see it's just started to pull those springs down. Right, now those are holding quite tight, but before we go any further I want to get all the others in, and then we'll tighten the whole lot. Okay, so those are all now lovely and tight. Obviously we've got the gear lever goes here, we've got an oil cap that goes here. But before we do those, we've got the top of the steering column that sits on top of here. Now, this is a relatively straightforward job. There's nothing difficult about it. But again, I don't believe there's a gasket for this, or if there is, I've not managed to find one. So I'm just going to put a little bit of this non-hardening sealant on here, just to make sure that we don't have any kind of oil leak or anything silly out of here. We shouldn't, because there should not be any oil up this high, but also just, I suppose, to keep moisture and water out, we want to just seal this as best we can. So that will do. Now we've got 4 bolts that go in here with some spring washers, so we've got those ready over there. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on this gear just to give it a head start. There we go, that'll do. great. Now, this obviously needs to come down on there and bolt down. Okay, something I need to show you here. What we want to do is basically have the steering in the front or straight on position when we're installing this. It's just so that we know where we are. So what you do is you basically put these drop arms so that they are basically as vertical as possible, right? So straight up and down as best you can. You can use as a guard, there's a little nobule on each side, which is basically where one of where one of the holes for those small screws is, where that hold the tin sheet in, so that you can actually see that there, and you can kind of line the arm up with that on each side, and that gives you, a good guard. Now, as it just happened to me, actually this one was one tooth forward, if you see what I mean. So just lift this. So obviously we're not tightening the bolts down yet. We can lift that. We can pull the arm out, right? So pull the drop arm out, and that allows you to move it backwards or forwards to get it to the right place. There it's wrong, and there it's right. So now we know both of those are straight up and down, and we know therefore that our steering is essentially in the straight ahead position. That way we just know where we are when we come to lining things up. So now we can tighten these down. And they're not the easiest bolts to do up because there's not a lot of space here, and you are fighting against the tension on the accelerator lever. There's a spring under here, and you are needing to push that down. So just a little bit on each bolt, just to get it to go down as evenly as possible. That way you're not stressing anything. There we go. There we are. So that's in now. And we can see now as we turn the steering, the arms are moving backwards and forwards. Now the next job really is to adjust these grub nuts essentially. We want to bring those in so that they are holding these arms and those gears inside right up against that crown gear. The pinion gear. So we'll start on this side. We get our big screwdriver and we basically want to just something in my finger there, splinter or something in my finger. Anyway, so what we want to do is take that in until we feel it touching that gear. And we'll do the other side a little bit as well. Okay, so that one's touching now. There we are, and that one's touching now as well. So now we have, there should be no play between these two arms, as in there should be no rocking. And similarly, when we try and turn the steering. Okay, so now if I hold the steering, the drop arm, and I turn the steering shaft, it's almost an immediate, it is an immediate reaction between those two. So, but it is very stiff. So I'm going to come back about 1/8 of a turn on that one, and about 1/8 of a turn on the other one. And again, just to double check, we can see that's now starting to work, but there is, when I hold one of them, there's a very small amount of play in that, probably still too much, but let's just see. When we hold that one and we turn the steering, it's an immediate, there is no delay in either direction. So, but we do have a little bit of play between these two arms, which just a little bit there. Okay. Now, probably you'd want to tighten those up, except for it's inevitable that where this grub nut has been wearing on that gear inside, that you're going to inevitably have a little bit of a flat there. So what you actually want to do is turn your steering probably about 2 or 3, you can see there it gets really stiff, right? So, and that's because the tractor spends most of its time in the forward position, and obviously as it's running along, you're running along and you're vibrating and whatever, you're basically wearing a flat on those half crown gears or half moon gears. And what that means is, if you leave it now where it's tight there, it's going to be too tight when you're actually trying to steer, when you're trying to turn a corner. So we're going to come out another, I'm going to make it a 1/16 or so on that one, and about a 1/16 on that one, and let's see how that is now. Okay, so now the steering is going, the travel is all the way, and we don't want to go too far because we'll come off of that half moon gear. It's a little bit, there's just one little bit there where it's catching, so I'm going to come another tiny little bit on that one. This one seems to be a little tighter than the other one. So there, and now I've gone too far. There we go. Okay, so that's something we've not talked about. Again, I'll put a link on to Bundy Bear's video. He did a video on this, and he probably covers it better than I can. But essentially, where you've got those two half moon gears, and obviously you've got the pinion gear in the middle, you can get to where the pinion comes off of the end of the half moon. Typically on one side, just before the other one. And like I said earlier, if these are not lined up in the central position when you start, that means you're not going to be in the forward position. You can actually turn it all the way to the end, take one of them off the end of the half moon and adjust it and basically click a gear and then come back, and that way you can get it back on. But anyway, that's not what we're doing at the moment. What we're doing at the moment is we're wanting to see and get our steering as tight as possible without it catching. So that's nice and smooth there. Lovely and smooth that way as well. So I think that's probably about the setting we're going to go with. Again, we can always adjust it again later if we need to. But the good news is that this steering is now, number one, it's lovely and smooth, and it is solid. There is no play whatsoever, no delay in the reaction on your drop arms when you turn the steering at the top here. Okay, so all we need to do now is tighten up these lock nuts, one on either side, without moving the screw in the middle. So we'll hold that with a screwdriver and we'll just tighten those up. Okay, and then we'll just check our steering again just to make sure that nothing's moved. Lovely and smooth there. Lovely and smooth in that direction. So we are in good shape. We've now set the steering. I'm happy with the steering. I'm happy with where it is. And what we can do now is we can basically deal with this lock tab. So what we want to do is find a tab where it's lined up with a flat at the bottom. And just pop that one over there. And then I think that one's the closest for the top. It feels like it may have broken. Yeah, that one's broken off unfortunately, so we'll have to find another one. Let's try this one. There we go, so those are not going to go anywhere now. You don't have to do all of them, and I'm not going to do all of them because, as you can tell, I'm actually using different ones now to what was there before. These lock tabs are currently not available, not that I could find anyway. You can make your own. It's a simple enough thing to do as long as you've got a drill big enough to drill a hole for this diameter here, so that it'll go over, and then obviously to cut the tabs. That would be a little bit of hand cutting and probably filing. So you could do it, but actually this one was still serviceable, so I'm going to go with it. But I'm going to leave these others in case we or somebody else needs them in the future. We can now move on to fitting the steering arms. So you'll remember that we restored or refurbished the steering arms, put new tie rod ends on. That was a whole video, a couple videos back, probably 4 or 5 videos back. But we couldn't put them on because obviously we needed to finish the steering box. So as you can see, we've got the steering rod here. It's just resting here. When I finished refurbishing, I did just put some plastic bags over the end just to keep those clean, to keep the new tie rods clean. But basically we're going to move on now and install those. So first thing we want to do is take these bags off, and if you remember, if you did watch the video where we were installing these tie rod ends, you remember that these bolts and nuts that we had on the end here, I said I was going to replace them. I've now got those nuts and bolts, so we will also do that at the same time. So that's the nuts and bolts that sit on the clamp that clamps the part closed to keep the tie rod in where you want it. Now in this video we're not going to set the wheel alignment. I will do that as a separate video because I think that warrants a video on its own. It will be hopefully a relatively short video, that one. But again, for the purpose of the channel, it makes sense for that to be a separate video, so that when somebody's searching for how to do that specifically, they can find that video, and it's not embedded in a longer video, and therefore not that easily or that easy to find. Anyway, so let's carry on. Okay, so first of all, I've got this the wrong way around, and I'll show you in a minute what I mean by that, but first let's just get these bags off the end and try to not lose the split pin. There's that one. Okay, so as I said, this one was the wrong way around. You remember when we did the other video, we talked about how basically the angle of this joint. So this one, as you can see, is straight. If I turn this around, you can see that that one is not straight, right? So it's sitting off at an angle. The angled one goes onto the drop arm of the steering box, and the straight one goes into the steering arm at the front. These are the bolts and nuts that I said I wanted to replace, so we'll do that quickly. And the other thing, just quickly to note, these front ones have a castellated nut with a split washer, and the other side has a nylock nut. Now, I think it's just a different brand. I think traditionally they would have had a castellated nut with a split washer, a split pin in here. But with this particular brand, they've obviously decided to go with a nylock nut. Now the other thing is, on this one we do have a protective cap, which is just for transportation and whatever, so that comes off. And as you can see, that's just protecting this surface here, which is a machine surface. We talked a little bit about that in the other video as well, which is basically essentially a Morse taper surface. Anyway, we'll just put that back for a minute. Right, so I'm going to quickly just change these bolts and nuts, and then we will move on. Okay, now I've not tightened those just yet. I want to get everything on, and then we'll just nip them up. When we come to adjust the wheel alignment, and obviously we need those loose anyway. So I think it's probably going to be easier to do the front one first. So what we want to do obviously is remove that castellated nut, and basically that goes in through there, and you push it down obviously. So if you have a look here, that opens up that surface. Hopefully you can see that. If I move my hand out of the way, that push that rubber back, and that's where you've got the Morse taper surface. So that goes on there. Just rest that there. Now immediately you can see it looks like I've actually got that nut and bolt in the wrong way, but we'll sort that out in a second. The reason why is you want the head of the bolt on top, actually, because this needs to turn so that this is actually at the bottom, this clamp, just to protect the nut and bolt from damage from the top. But also, so actually it's the right way around. When that turns, then that head of the bolt will be sticking out this way, which is where you want it, so towards the outside of the tractor. It's not essential, it just means that the nut is protected from the main, or the majority of the elements, if you see what I mean. Yeah, actually the other side has moved, that's why that's not lining up, so we'll sort that out in a second. But basically, you want to tighten that up reasonably tight. And in fact, I think I'm going to put a washer in there, because that hole for the split pin is now a long way away. Right, now what we want to do as we're tightening that up is make sure that a slot lines up with the hole for the split pin. So just about there. And that means that the split pin will now can go through there, and hopefully will line up on the other side, which it doesn't quite. There we go. Right. Now I want to put it from the front towards the back, if you see what I mean, the split pin. Just like that. I'm not going to finish that off just yet. I want to get everything on, and then we'll sort that out. Right, so now you can see we've got, well, this is, we're on this side now. Now what we want to do, first of all, is take that nylock nut off and remove the transport cap. Now, as I said, I want this to be that way, so that on the other side the bolt is at the bottom, and as you can see on this side as well, and then that's going to go in there. So right, so we just move the wheel, turn the wheel until that lines up, and we'll push it into where it needs to be. Just make sure I've got the right spanner here. I don't think I do. That's a different size spanner. Let me just get a different spanner. Okay, now a little bit annoyingly, that's actually a metric size. It's a 19 metric size, so that's not great, but it is unfortunately what it is. Right, so you do have to pull it out a little bit, get the nut in at the back, and then thread it on. And use the nut to pull it in, basically, because there's not a lot of space here. Okay. Now, you want that to be quite tight, which will force that Morse taper to hold. And of course you also want to make sure that the nylock or the nylon section of the nut actually connects or goes onto the thread. So there you go, so that's on now. Now if I just zoom out again, so you can see the wheel hub here currently tracking left, right, so it's not straight, we're not in the straight ahead position. More importantly, you can see that I can now turn this bar and it adjusts the angle of that hub. Obviously not a lot, it's a little bit at a time, but we're going to leave it where we were for now. We're going to connect the other side and we'll see where that wheel sits, as in hopefully it'll be heading in roughly the same direction at the moment. So let's move around to the other side. So I'm just going handheld here just to show you. So at the moment the steering should be in the straight ahead position, I believe. I might be wrong on that, but in terms of how I've got the drop arms positioned, which is basically where they are vertical, you can see the two wheels are essentially heading off in different directions. One to the left, that one more pronounced, and then that one off to the right, less pronounced, but still very definitely off to the right. So we've definitely got a problem with how we've set those drop arms. I suspect that I've got the excuse me, the drop arms and the pinion orientation incorrect when I installed the steering column, and it looks like I probably need to do that again. So yeah, let's work through it. Okay, so hopefully as you can see here, I've got the steering wheel temporarily installed. I'm hoping that that view gives you a good impression of how incorrect the steering is. Now, I think what's going on here is I think that I have misjudged how, where these arms need to be in terms of the straight ahead position. What I'm going to do, I think, is I'm going to loosen these bolts at the top here, loosen these grub screws, and see if we can get it to line up to where the steering wheel is in the straight ahead position, which should be there, I believe. Or is it there? Don't really know. I suppose that's probably better, where you've got the center arm up straight ahead and these two here, because when you're driving, it's quite nice to keep your hands there, if you see what I mean. So what we might do is try and get it to line up to where that's the straight ahead position, and then and try and see if we can get it to work that way. Now, one thing I've noticed, if I go full lock in either direction, I see that in this case, my right hand wheel is essentially at full lock, and my left hand wheel is in the straight ahead position. So I'm essentially 1/2 of a rotation out, I believe. If we look here, this is if we watch this spindle and we go to full lock the other way, you'll see we've got less than 1 rotation, which is not right. It should be, I believe it's somewhere in the order of about 2.5 or 2.25, if I'm not mistaken. But let's see how we go. So we're going to loosen this off, and we're going to loosen those off, and then see what we can see. Okay, now hopefully what you can see is I've loosened these, I've taken those all the way out, I've loosened all these bolts, and that means now that we will be able to pull these the drop arms out. And if we lift this steering column, which is now obviously a little bit stuck because of that sealant we put on, but it will come. Okay. Just gently prise it up. There we go. Now, what we want to try and do is get the two wheels, the hubs, to be in the forward position. Now, let's do this. I might have to take this off, to be honest. I think that might be the better way to do it. And then what we'll do is we'll get the wheels in the straightforward position, and then bring this back in with the steering as we want it to be. And then, hopefully, everything should line up. There we go. So let's just take that off. There we go. I'll rest that on top of the engine for a minute. Right, so we'll get the two hubs as close to the straight ahead position, which is there. Now what we can see on our drop arms is that they are, I would say, about 30 degrees and maybe 15 degrees off of vertical. No, I've never been a very good judge of angles, but just wondering if we need to put some more sealant on here. I just don't want any moisture getting in there. And obviously we've destroyed that seal now. Yeah, let me just put a little bit more sealant on. Because in theory what we can do now is bring the steering down roughly in the position that we want the steering wheel to be in, and that will be the straight ahead position, and should give us our full travel as well in terms of the number of turns from lock to lock. Okay, so what we want is we want our steering wheel to be there. We may have to play with the teeth to get it to line up. Actually, no, that seems to be about there. Let's see if we can get that. See if we can get it in like that. Okay, I'm not going to tighten it just yet. We never know, may take this off again. So I'm just getting them down to where the two faces are meeting, and the bolts are holding tight. Right, so that's that. Now what we'll do is we'll bring these back in. Okay, that's tight. So that one tight up against the pinion gear. Okay, that one's tight. So we've got no movement there. We've got absolutely no movement there. Right, so what we'll do is we'll come back, I'm going to say a 16th of a turn on that one, and a 16th on this one. So about there. We'll pop the steering wheel back on. Hopefully we didn't lose the key. No, we didn't. And there we are now. We haven't got to the lock yet. There we are. So that's the lock, right? So we follow it from there. To there. That's one. That's the straight ahead position pretty much. And to there. So we're 1 and I'm going to say 1 3/4. But it's a little bit more than that. Okay, so now we'll get back to the straight ahead. So there's your straight ahead. That feels a little bit tight to me, so we're going to take these back just a little smidgen. Just to there. And this one as well. And let's try it now. Still feels a little bit crunchy to me. I'm going to take a little bit more off, a little bit more pressure off. That one feels loosish. So there's that. I'm actually going to leave it there, to be honest. Doesn't feel like there's much more to go. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Okay, I've just been playing with it a little bit, and I've done a couple of things. One, I I actually loosened this bottom nut just literally maybe 1 degree, just to take the tension off this bearing. It felt to me like there was a little bit of crunchiness going on inside there. The other thing I did, I've just been playing with these drop arms and just testing. So you can see there, we only just got a little bit of movement in that position. Move it just a little bit, and we've got a bit more. Move it some more, and some more. And basically what I want is, I want at least some movement, even if it's a fraction of a millimeter at every position. Because otherwise, it is going to feel tight when you come out of that position. And I've done that on both sides. And now I can turn the steering essentially with one hand, like that, all the way from lock to lock. And it feels really, really good. I'm really happy with that. So I'm going to go with that. I suspect that after, I don't know, a couple of hours of work, I might want to readjust these, especially once everything is settled down. But right now, I'm really happy with this action and how this is working. And as I said before, I'm still sorting out the cap or the cup that goes underneath there. We've actually got a new steering wheel to go on. We're not going to use this old rusty one. And we'll finish that off at a later point. But all I'm going to do now, I'm going to lock these because I haven't locked the lock nuts yet. I'm going to finish off or basically just open or spread the legs on those split pins. And essentially, I'm going to leave the steering here. I'm not going to film that because, I mean, you know how to do that. There's no point filming that. I think the point is I'm getting at is I think I'm going to leave this video here. So, massive correction when you want to achieve the straight ahead position. Your drop arms are not vertical. They're actually sitting at about 15 degrees. My suggestion, if you're doing this job, is get the steering box on, get your steering arms on, and then bring your steering column in. It's a lot easier that way. That way you don't need to worry. You won't land up with the problem I had where we were essentially one half of a steering wheel rotation out, and in fact we lost half a or one whole rotation, just about. The good news is that we're now in the straight ahead position. Our spindle, or this spindle is pointing straight ahead. If you want to do it a different way, you can do it a different way. You might want to put it at the bottom. It's up to you. I think that probably looks about right. But you can adjust that. Take this off, put it where you want it, put it back in, because this turns 360 degrees. It doesn't matter. What determines your actual travel is the stops on your hubs, which are transferred into your steering into your steering box, and of course the length of travel you've got on those two half-moon gears. So the way to adjust this, if you want to adjust it, is to remove this, put it in the steering wheel where you want it to be, and pop it straight back in. And that's where you want to be. So yeah, that's the steering done. That's a massive milestone again. That allows us now to finish off the engine and then start adding all the bits that go on in the front here to hold the battery, the fuel tank, etc., etc. So all of this can now start going on as soon as we've sorted out the engine. The engine is just about there now. I still need to sort out what's going on with that distributor. I think what I'm going to do is make two spaces, one for the top and one for the bottom of that little collar, and I think that will sort that out. It also then means that there is a gasket there, whereas before at the moment we don't have one. So that'll sort that out as well. I think that's probably going to be the next video, and then we can move on and hopefully get all the fluids in. This needs to be filled to the bottom of this hole here with just ordinary engine oil, universal tractor oil, doesn't really matter. It's not spinning, it's not moving it at high revolution, so it just needs lubrication. That's all it wants. It doesn't need to be anything special whatsoever. We've got to get oil into the gearbox and the crankcase, or the transfer case, and back into the diff. Something like 22 litres of oil. So Anglo have sent me the oil for that. Obviously, I'll do a video on that, and we'll get that sorted out, and then we can put the oil into the engine, and yeah, soon we'll be moving to firing this puppy up and see whether all of our hard work on the engine has been worthwhile, and yeah, hopefully it will run. But listen, thanks for joining us for this video. Again, you know, mistakes happen, or not just mistakes, but you know, we're learning as we're going, and hopefully that saves you from making a mistake of a similar nature if you're having to do this job. It's partly why we do these videos, and partly obviously just for the fun of it. So hope that you found that interesting, and hope that you have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you on the next video. So cheers for now.